Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. Today we are exploring one of the most difficult and crucial questions in history. What was the role of Africans in the transatlantic slave trade? This isn't about assigning blame. It's about understanding a complex system of power, commerce, and tragedy. To see the full picture, we have to go back to the beginning, to a time long before the slave trade as we know it was born.
For centuries, we've been shown the same story of the slave trade. The ships, the chains, the captives. But that's not where the story begins. To understand the true tragedy, you must look inland to the powerful kingdoms of West Africa, such as the Asante and Dahomey. Here, slavery already existed, but it was a different world. A person could be enslaved as a prisoner of war or to pay a debt, but they could work their way to freedom. They could marry, own land, and rejoin society. It was a system of power and punishment, but it had limits. But within that system was a dangerous, fragile idea. The idea that one human life could be another's property. And when European merchants arrived with their goods, they didn't need to break down the door. They just had to lean on that fragile idea until it cracked. This is the story of how that crack became a chasm, how a local practice was twisted into a global nightmare. This is the deal that shattered a continent. The story didn't start with the Atlantic Ocean. It started long before that, in the sand. Before the first European ship arrived, a different kind of slave trade already existed in Africa. It moved quietly through the Sahara Desert, connecting the north and the south for centuries. Arab merchants had been crossing the Sahara for over 1,000 years. They traded gold, salt, silk, and horses. But along with those goods, they also traded people. In kingdoms like Mali and Kanem Bornu, captives were often prisoners of war or people sold to pay off debts. They were forced to march for weeks across the desert, under extreme heat, with little water. Many never made it to the end of the journey. Those who did were sold in markets in North Africa and the Middle East. And this wasn't the only route. On the other side of the continent, along the Swahili coast, another trade was growing. In places like Zanzibar and Kilwa, African captives were sold to Arab and Indian merchants. From there, they were taken to places like Yemen, India, and Persia. These trades had been going on for centuries. The people involved saw it as part of war or part of paying off debts, not as a race-based system, but as a way to gain power or survive. So when the first Portuguese ships arrived on Africa's western coast, they didn't create slavery. They simply entered a system that was already there and made it far worse. They turned what had once been local and limited into something global, something brutal, organized, and endless. This was the turning point. The moment when the old ways of trade became a machine that would change the fate of millions. This is where the story truly begins, where the world started to shift and the balance of power would never be the same again. For a long time, trade in Africa had its own rhythm. People traded across the desert and along the coast, salt, gold, ivory, and other goods. It was a system everyone understood. But in 1471, everything started to change. Portuguese explorers arrived on the Gold Coast, today's Ghana. At first, they came for gold, and they found plenty. But when the gold started to run low, their attention shifted. They saw something else that could bring even more profit: people. At that time, slavery already existed in parts of Africa, but it was small scale and local. The Portuguese saw a chance to expand it into something global. They began offering African rulers guns, clothes, and alcohol in exchange for captives. It wasn't always through war or violence. Many of these early deals were made through trade and negotiations. But over time, this trade began to change everything. Wars were no longer about defending land or power. They became about capturing people. Villages that had lived side by side for generations suddenly became enemies. Some kings sent raiders far inland, not to expand territory, but to find captives to sell. And the arrival of European guns made these raids faster and deadlier than ever before. By 1526, the first ship carrying enslaved Africans left for Brazil. That single journey marked the beginning of something much bigger, a system that would spread across the Atlantic and change the world forever. The old desert trade routes began to fade. In their place rose the Atlantic slave trade, a brutal business that would grow for centuries. When the European ships arrived, they didn't just bring goods, they changed everything. Trade was no longer just about gold or spices. It became a fight for survival. Once guns entered the picture, no kingdom could stay neutral. If your neighbor had weapons and you didn't, your people were in danger. Across West Africa, from the Ashanti forests to the plains of Oyo, rulers faced an impossible choice. To protect your people, you needed guns, but to get guns, you had to trade people. It was a painful deal, one that forced leaders to choose between defense and morality. To stay safe, they had to hurt others. And once it started, it never stopped. The Oyo Empire sent out its famous cavalry, attacking nearby villages. Captives were sold, and the profits bought more weapons. Each victory only fueled the next war. Some kingdoms tried to hold their ground, like Benin, whose Oba refused to sell his own people. But when other rulers grew stronger and more armed, even justice became a kind of trade. Prisoners, criminals, anyone considered expendable could be exchanged for guns. This was called the gun-slave cycle, a trap that fed on fear and power. Every new shipment of captives made some kingdoms stronger, but it also pulled them deeper into a system that was tearing Africa apart from within. What began as trade had now become survival, and survival had a terrible price. By the 1600s, one kingdom stood out in West Africa, Dahomey, in what is today Benin. It was a place that had learned how to survive in a world driven by fear and power. King Huwekpaja started what he thought was just strategy, capturing enemies during war. But his son, King Agaja, took it further. He made it national policy. If you couldn't trade gold or land, you traded people. And Dahomey became very good at it. The kingdom built a reputation for strength. Its most feared soldiers weren't men, they were women. The Dahomey Amazons, fierce, disciplined warriors, marched at dawn to raid nearby villages. They burned huts, captured the strong, and marched them to the coast. At Udia, European traders were already waiting. They brought guns, gunpowder, and rum, and in return, they got human lives. Each raid made Dahomey richer, stronger, and more dependent on a system that couldn't last. By the 1800s, King Gezo ruled an empire built on slavery. When British envoys begged him to stop, he refused. He said, "The slave trade is the ruling principle of my people. It is the source and glory of their wealth." For Gezo, ending the trade wasn't just losing money. It meant losing Dahomey itself. It was a kingdom trapped by its own success, too deep in the trade to ever turn back. While Dahomey built its empire on the coast, deep in the forests of what's now Ghana, another kingdom was rising, the Ashanti. At first, The Ashanti weren't known for capturing people. They were known for their gold, beautiful ornaments, bracelets, and the sacred golden stool that symbolized the soul of their nation. Trade was their strength. Gold and kola nuts flowed through their markets, making Kumasi one of the richest cities in West Africa. But then came the guns. By the early 1700s, European traders, British, Dutch, Portuguese, all offered the same bargain: guns and gunpowder in exchange for captives. And just like Dahomey, the Ashanti faced a choice: trade or be left behind. So they went to war. They began raiding smaller Akan states, Denkira, Akiem, Akwamu, capturing their enemies and sending them to the coast to forts like Elmina and Cape Coast Castle. Each prisoner sold meant more weapons, more gold, and more dominance. What started as defense turned into strategy. What began as trade became survival. The Ashanti Empire grew powerful, feared, respected, unstoppable. But behind the golden stool, behind the drums and riches, was a shadow no one could ignore. Every victory meant another village destroyed. Every deal with Europeans meant another step deeper into a system that was slowly eating away at the very heart of Africa. By the time the 1800s arrived, the Ashanti, like Dahomey, were trapped, caught between pride, profit, and the heavy price of survival. As the wars raged across Africa, from the Ashanti forests to the Dahomey coast, one thing became clear: war alone didn't make money. Someone had to turn all that chaos into profit. And that's where the middlemen came in. They weren't kings or warriors. They were businessmen, clever, fearless, and sometimes ruthless. They understood something many didn't: that the real power wasn't in fighting the wars, but in controlling what came after the wars: the trade. On the coast of Dahomey, one man stood above the rest: Francisco Felix de Souza, a Brazilian trader. People called him the Viceroy of Ouidah. He wasn't African, but he became one of the most powerful men in West Africa. He built alliances with kings, fixed prices, and managed slave shipments like a modern businessman runs a company. If you wanted to trade with Dahomey, you had to go through him. In a way, he ran the business of slavery, and business was booming. But not every story belonged to a man. In Lagos, there was Madame Efunroye Tinubu, a woman who changed the game. She wasn't born into royalty, but she built her own empire from the ground up. Tinubu traded with Europeans, dealt in slaves, and sold weapons that fueled more wars. Her ambition was unmatched. People feared her, respected her, and depended on her. Yet her success came with a heavy price. The same system that made her powerful destroyed countless lives beneath her. It's painful to imagine the same hands that counted profits also signed the fate of so many captives. The merchants, men like De Souza, women like Tinubu, were the bridge between Africa's wars and Europe's ships. They turned human suffering into business deals. They didn't fight battles on the field. They fought them in negotiation rooms, at the docks, in ledgers. They proved that in this new world, power wasn't just about strength or bravery anymore. It was about control. And the ones who controlled the trade controlled the future.
While the merchants and middlemen were growing rich, not everyone wanted to be part of the trade. In the heart of Yoruba land, a new kind of city was rising: Abeokuta. It was built by freed slaves, runaways,
and people who were simply tired of seeing their own sold. Missionaries joined them, teaching that trade could mean palm oil, cotton, and peace, not people in chains. For a while, it worked. Abeokuta became a symbol of hope, proof that Africans could build wealth without blood. But hope always threatens power. In 1851, Daomi's armies marched on Abeokuta. Their reason? The city had cut off their supply of captives. The battle was fierce. Smoke filled the sky, and though Abeokuta fought back and survived, it paid dearly with countless lives and lasting scars. By the late 1800s, the slave trade was ending on paper. Britain had banned it. America too. But in Africa, it didn't just disappear. It changed shape. Now it was called domestic service or pawnship. Different names, same chains. The trade had already taken too much. Villages were empty, families erased, knowledge lost forever. And even as peace slowly returned, it didn't bring back what was gone. Only silence and the memories of a continent that had traded its people to survive. After the wars ended, after the ships stopped sailing, Africa was never the same. The trade had taken more than people. It took trust, unity, and time itself. Whole generations vanished. Villages that once sang together became silent names on old maps. Even today, you can still feel it. The regions that lost the most lives are often the ones still struggling to rebuild. And the borders carved by colonizers, many of them followed the same routes that once carried slaves to the coast. The divisions between communities, Yoruba and Dahomey, Ashanti and Fanti, didn't start in colonial times. They began when survival turned neighbor against neighbor. It's a heavy inheritance, not one of guilt, but of memory. A reminder of what happens when greed becomes stronger than compassion. But knowing the story changes something. Because when you understand how it all began, you can choose how it ends. History isn't just about the past. It's about identity. It's about refusing to repeat the same mistakes and rebuilding what was broken piece by piece. We can't rewrite what happened, but we can decide what comes next. And maybe that's how healing begins.
If this story resonated with you, if it made you see this chapter of history in a new light, then do me one small favor. Please like this video, share it with one person who will find it valuable, and subscribe to the channel. You might wonder, why does this matter? Well, every like, share, and especially every comment you leave does two powerful things. This story out to other history lovers just like you. And it tells me what you want to see next. This is our community. So if you have a history story you would like us to treat, you drop your suggestion in the comments. I read every single one. My name is Oma. Thank you for watching, for learning, and for caring about these stories with me. I will see you in the next one.